and a final inscription nonsense video, we're going to do a tier list. So my lowest tier is going to be the worst, just cards like I think are just horrible, like River Otter, good example. Um, 1/1 can't jump block. Just I never want this card, right? If I have any options at all, I'm gonna try not to take this card. Then we have I'm not happy about this, but it's not the worst. These are kind of cards I'd really like to not have in my deck, but they can end up in my deck and it's not the end of the world. Maybe Bloodhound is a good example. Just by being 2 cost in blood, it doesn't get in the way of fair hand mechanic where like the only cards that can be the absolute worst, I think, are bad 1 drops. Because a deck can be great and have any number of horrible 2 drops in it, and they just don't matter because you've set it up well enough you can win on your 1 drops. And that's how a lot of decks win. So like the worst of the 2 drops land here because if they end up in your deck, you can usually work around it and it's just not that big a problem. So maybe Bloodhound's a good example of that. Maybe something like Stoat is another decent example of like this is a card, it doesn't naturally come with an ability. So if you're playing Skullstorm, and I'm doing this evaluation entirely for Skullstorm, but it's kind of like you move its ability to something, you're just giving it annoying. That's not great because it comes with annoying. It's a vanilla one too, it has no abilities. This is just like it can be in your deck. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to ruin your deck. This is not what usually makes or breaks a deck. Though it is a 1 drop, so it does get in the way of stuff, but the vanilla deck is better than people think, so it can't be as bad as people think. It can block, it's a card, but it's not a card we're at all happy about. Then we have build around fits, and I think like Worker Ant and basically just all the ants fit here. Where this is a card like if your deck is devoted to this thing, maybe you have the totem, you can play this way. I did end up beating the ant building, actually using ants rather than trying to pivot off them. Flying ant's probably the best of them. Maybe worker ant. The ant queen has a nice ability that you can move to other things or relatively nice, but these cards are all cards that are just very dependent on having a whole lot committed to them being good, right? If you only have one of them, it's just a pretty bad card. Like the worker ant is just a stoat if there's just one of them. But it can be clearly better than a stoat if you build your whole deck to do it. It's just not actually that great to build your whole deck to do it. So this is a category that I have pretty low, and I have it below niche fit, which is basically this card is really good if you combine its ability with something else. Like this card can have a seriously positive impact. And I'm going to put some cards here that you think are way worse than the ants. I'm going to put the beaver here because I think the black goat deck, which is quite good, which is very good, genuinely really wants the beaver. Right? You want some way to have the goat effect happen multiple times. If you put beaver ability on the goat, you have 3 things you can sack. That's really easy to get 1 turn kills out of. It's a very powerful effect. Note, the alpha does not actually cost 5 bones, so I'm not sure what the glitch is there. I'm going to put the adder here. I think a little less valuable, but any deck depending on maybe Direwolf is going to have an easier time fighting through the grizzly bears if it has death touch. There's a bunch of things that like death touch. This also clears out can clear out campfires. And if you get health plus at a campfire and give it to the adder twice, a 1/5 adder is a pretty decent value anyway. And if it dies, then it poisons the campfire and you're good. I might even put the ringworms here, which is pretty ambitious, but I think, oops, but I think being able to poison the campfire is just so useful for certain decks that something like this, it's you don't have to build your whole deck to justify this card. And on Skullstorm, it has annoying, which makes it not as hard to get rid of. It's fine. Like these are just cards that like it's not hurting your deck to have it in. It's a normal thing. So a lot of the bones cards I would put in it's fine, right? I would say this is fine to have in your deck. Alpha is at the top end of this, I would say, and alpha maybe has a case to be higher, but generally cards that don't interfere with the rest of what you're doing, um, that are like clearly reasonable value, and it's just like this is a card. Maybe Wolf is kind of the quintessential example. I don't mind having Wolf in my decks. The vanilla deck is better than people think. Wolf does real damage. Oh, I'm putting it higher than this. Sorry. Let's put it ahead of Coyote. It's fine. Like, this is just a reasonable card. It has quite a bit of power. You can do stuff with it. With just +1 attack and just a little help from items, it can beat Grizzlies. Like, this is a card that, these are all cards that, like, yeah, they're useful. They land usefully. I think Coyote's a little worse than the others here. It's pretty rare that Coyote or Bat, which I think are approximately the same level of card. Um, it's pretty rare that they hit for bigger impact. In Wolf and Alpha, it's a bit more frequent. Like, Alpha can be that key extra point of damage. You know, you give Wolf +1, you have a Scissors, you have an Alpha next to it, you suddenly have 5 damage, right? Um, so I think these cards are a little more relevant to how stuff is actually won. But the Coyote and Bat can just be so useful, and you can play a card that doesn't cost blood and a deck that, you know, everything else costs blood. That's really nice to have. Then there's just important cards to useful strategies. So, like, maybe the Black Goat's a good example here. Sorry, I don't know how to get it to the top immediately. Of just, like, building a deck around the Black Goat is just really strong. And the Black Goat deck is one of the best decks because you can just start with this card every time and be organized around it. And that deck already comes with a 3-drop built in, so you're ready to use it. So that deck is already built to make the Goat look good, and it certainly does. Some might argue it higher. I think it's right about here. There are lots of decks where, like, you have some other 1-drops and you come across the Black Goat, and it's just not relevant to what your deck is doing, right? It's not, it's something that, like, ooh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll move there. It has a huge side benefit that you can, if you give it to the Bone Lord, he can give you 8 bones at the start. But I think it's not quite up there to Centerpiece. For something like Centerpiece, I'm going to go with the Warren. I love the Warren. The Warren is so good. Being able to ramp up, being able to take any good ability and just have it land twice because you play the Warren and the other thing. This is amazing. And for the best stuff, let's go with Mantis God, because I do think Mantis God is just brokenly powerful. It's not that amazing at clearing the Grizzlies, but there's no single card that without some help just easily trivializes the Grizzlies. There's no, like, even something like Lammergeier, which people use tricks with. There's no, like, I got that, I now just don't have to worry about it. You still have to worry about it. You still have to line it up right. Okay, so where do we put other things? I think Bullfrog is very much in this. It's not the worst category. Can I move it? Yeah. Okay. Amoeba is definitely in the fine category. It's bones. It has a little bit of impact. It has a random ability. Sometimes it comes nice. It's fine. Goes in your deck. Um, Amalgam is better than Wolf, but it is a rare, so it never, like, you don't get it much. And I don't think the extra point of defense makes that much difference. It's still, a point of attack would make a lot of difference. It would make it really close to breaking through on bears. Incidentally, the It's Fine category is going to be by far the biggest. But it's not that valuable. Alpha does have a case to be higher. Beehive. I'm tempted. I'm between two spots here. I think the Beehive's a pretty good 1-drop, but you're so miserable if you build around this and you hit flyers and you just lose. Because if it spawns bees and you have a nice ability landing with it, then it can be great. But if it never gets to spawn the bees, then it's a really blank 1-drop. It's either the bottom of this category or the top of the next. It and Alpha, I think, are pretty close. Okay, the Bell Ringer. This card naturally comes with 4 power. And that means it is legitimately able, with just a little help, can do good against Grizzlies. If you can give it double strike, or you can give it 1 extra point of damage and you get a Scissors or a Turner or something, you can beat the Grizzlies with it. You give it Death Touch and 1 extra point of damage from somewhere, it can beat the Grizzlies. So I think this is, like, a pretty significant upgrade on Amalgam and Wolf. And, like, a lot of decks seeing a pickup like this card specifically early is really valuable. The Hand Tentacle, it's not the worst. Maybe it could go in niche because sometimes you can. But the infinite combos, like, if you have, like, a Warren creating infinite bunnies kind of thing, like, you're going to win anyway because of that. So I think this is I'm not happy about it, but it's not the worst. The cat. The cat's pretty interesting. I think the cat is fine. It suffers basically from it doesn't have a natural place it goes. If you are playing Skullstorm, you are very likely abusing Fairhand Mechanic, and if you are abusing Fairhand Mechanic, you kind of need power out of your one drop. You need it to either land and tutor or land and spawn a bunch of stuff. All the cat does is make other stuff cheaper, but you still need to sacrifice something else to play two drops. So the deck where the cat is the best is a deck where it's surrounded by one drops and you can just land them all quickly. But a deck where it's surrounded by one drops is not a deck abusing Fairhand Mechanic, so it's probably not that amazing a deck. That said, I do like the ability, but it can be hard to find a spot for it. Child 13 is a better version. You don't really get rares in Skullstorm, but this is probably up here, just because it can attack, right? Once you sacrifice it once, it can attack. It's easier to fit this in a deck and have it do something useful. I could be overrating it a little here. Incidentally, the Warren's definitely better than the Beehive. Anyone who has the Beehive and Warren next to each other has not dealt with, like, turn 1 double strike turkey vultures ending their runs. Cockroach. So Undying is just about the best ability. Um, it's unbelievably good. You know, you put Undying with the Warren, oh my god. You put Undying with the Beehive, as long as you don't fight flyers, oh my god. You put Undying with the Black Goat, you can sacrifice for your 3 drops trivially forever, right? This is such an incredible, powerful effect on basically all the other great cheap cards. All of them want this. And if they have it, they're in great shape. Corpse Maggots. I love Corpse Maggots. We're going to put this as important card to useful strategies. You get one of these, and suddenly 2 and 3 drops, you can take them that you wouldn't take otherwise, and you have a way to get them out. A downside to it is you can't always control as well where they land. It's not always easy to figure out exactly what's going to die first through combat. But it is just such a nice card to have in the deck, and it gives you access to stuff you wouldn't have otherwise. The Cuckoo. Now, I think there are people who are much higher on this card than I am. I think it's got to be in this section, but I'm not sure it's above it. It can single-handedly block a lane, and if it gets +1 to attack, then even if it spawns a Raven, it goes even with that lane. That means, you know, you get that Turkey Vulture fight, you just play it as your turn 1, and suddenly that Turkey Vulture isn't coming down. But it's not going to sweep fights or give you the entire win in the way some other cards will, right? The Cuckoo decks are not decks that are one-turn killing. They're decks that, like, I'm going to hold off, I'm going to develop my board, I'm going to have a good all-around deck, but good all-around decks aren't the most broken. I really like this card. If I was banned from using Fairhand Mechanic, I would place it higher, because then I'd run a lot more 1-drops, and it would be a 1-drop I'd be very happy to run. But I don't think I can put it any higher. The Douse, kind of interesting card. 2/2, spawns 2 bells next to him, and if they're hit, he gets to counterattack. The thing is, it's already a 2/2 for 2, so it's basically all. I mean, it can't be in the worst category. It's probably fine. Like, how much worse than the wolf can it be? Those bells you can't sacrifice, but you could use it like you use the beaver and combine it with the black goat. Now, you basically never get it because it's a rare, so it's just irrelevant to Skullstorm. But I think it's fine. I think that's a totally fine card. And anything that spawns extra stuff, there's going to be tricks you can do. Like, if you put, like, this ability with Alpha, right, then you'd spawn a, say, 2/2 with 2 1/2s basically next to it that both pump up the 2/2 because they'd all give +1 to each other. It would be a 4/2 and you drop 6 points of attack. Like, there's just going to be so many different things like that. Like, you combine it with the Beehive, and suddenly you'd specifically put the Douse's ability on the Beehive. Then it loses the attack part, both because the Beehive is 0 attack, and secondly because that part doesn't work if you move the ability. But the Beehive spawns these 2 things, and if they're hit, you also get bees. There's just going to be tools to use this. It kind of has to be better than the Beaver, and the Beaver already has decent uses. Direwolf. Now, Direwolf, I think, is just a really important card. And as is Direwolf Pup. I think there's just so many decks where it's your target 3-drop. You have the Null deck, it's great to get it. You can easily put it out, and it wins fights. You have the Black Goat deck, you can easily put it out. But even a bunch of other decks, the Egg deck can pretty easily put it out. Just one, but it can get one out. If you get a Corpse Maggots, you can put it out. And so often you need to be able to do 5 damage to a lane, and the dire wolf is really close to being able to do 5 damage to a lane. And unlike the bell ringer, it can do it from lots of lanes. So the reason I don't have the dire wolf higher is because there are a bunch of cards that can perform a similar role, but you need something in that role most of the time to be able to beat Skullstorm. Like the Mantis God deck wants a dire wolf early or something like it, because the Mantis God part of the deck is very unlikely to get enough boosts to already be able to beat the Grizzlies, even with item help. But the Dire Wolf, with a little item help, can do it. And it doesn't get in the way of any one turn kill fair hand mechanic abuses. All right, Dire Wolf Pup is probably in a similar spot. Um, it's a little easier to get out, but it's also easier to have it die. And, if you're in the Black Goat deck, the cost difference is not important to you. The default one comes with Annoying, which means you can't even stick it behind a fur without dying in the Bones deck, but these are very important cards to being able to beat Skullstorm. Elk Fawn. I think I like it more than the I'm not happy about it category, but I don't think it's quite fine because a 1/1 that becomes a 2/4 is like okay, but it blocks your 1-drops, and you don't want to be drawing this when there's other stuff. Pack Rat is great. Items are just so important. I'm not sure Pack Rat belongs here, but items are important enough that they deserve to be in the centerpiece or broken category. I'm going to put it here. The reason you don't get a ton of Pack Rats is because you want to get the item refills even more. But having a Pack Rat, being able to put it on something, especially something that recurs, is just such a powerful, useful effect. Maybe this is wrong because I often kind of go a different path when I pick up a Pack Rat and go back to pick it up later. But items are so important, I want to put it in centerpiece because that kind of speaks to the category, even if the card itself might not be there. Elk, I'm not happy about it. Again, kind of meh 2-drops are go around here. This card randomly spawns something in your hand. I'm just going to put it here. I'm not sure exactly. I really hate Great White, but it's not a 1-drop, so it can't be the worst. Grizzly is very good. Grizzly is very good. It's one of those cards that is really close to 5 damage. So is really, just needs a touch of help to get over the top to be able to beat Grizzlies with, the opposing Grizzlies with. It's either here or at the bottom of this category. I'm going to put it in its fine. Dire Wolf is a little better. The fact that Dire Wolf can reach 6 damage, the fact that if you move Dire Wolf's double strike to Wolf, that reaches 6 damage, right? You can't, Grizzlies to reach 5 damage needs Campfire help. Dire Wolf to reach 5 damage could use Campfire help, but it could also move its ability somewhere else, and that probably means overall it's a little more useful than Dire Wolf Pup, because, if you get a wolf or just something with 3 power, you suddenly have a way to get over the 5. Okay, I'm going to skip some of these for now. Lammergeier, I'm going to call a niche fit. I know Lammergeier has a way to beat the Grizzlies that I really should get good at doing, but I've not done it yet, so we're just going to call it a niche fit. Magpie. Magpie is the best. Magpie's fantastic. Magpie and Warren is amazing. We had that in one of the runs. You play the Warren, you get to draw the best card from your deck, and then you play the bunny, and you get to draw the next best card, or whatever, the rabbit it spawns. And you get to spawn the next best card from your deck. And you can draw to the situation. You put Magpie on the Beehive, you get a similar great effect. You put the Magpie on the Black Goat, you can draw whatever the best target for the Black Goat sacrifice is. All of the best 1-drops are much better if you combine them with Magpie. Except maybe Mantis God, which probably prefers other things, but Magpie is just so good. And the other thing is, if you have a great 1-drop and a shitty 1-drop, like you have, Elk Fawn, you put Magpie on Elk Fawn, and Elk Fawn just gets your better 1-drop or whatever you need for the situation. Suddenly, it is just as good as the other one because it gets you the other one and creates a bone or 2 while it does so. So Magpie solves so many dex problems. It's an amazing card. Let's do Mantis next. Mantis is very good. Mantis, any kind of big attacker or medium attacker, you put this on it, and suddenly that can sneak through the extra points of damage to a different lane to get the kill against the Grizzlies. Um, it also is pretty good on its own if you upgrade it. Like, it's obviously not Mantis God, but it is the budget version. It's just really useful, and there's kind of the only decks where you don't want it are where you have a better one drop and are happily building around that. But it's a very nice place to start. It's a very strong one drop, very good move to other cards. Like, you don't have to keep it as a one drop. You can say, okay, I have a Grizzly. Let's just make that amazing, or a Wolf, or whatever. Or I want my Adder to kill two things at once. Mealworm is fine. It's another, like, these bone cards are fine. They're not gonna break the game. They're not gonna make your deck, but they're not gonna stop your deck either. I don't like these Krakens. I do like to hand one more. No, I hate this Kraken. It can't attack against an empty square. I hate the Mole. These cards are probably better than the River Otter, but again, cards like this are going to get in the way of drawing your good one drops. Mole Man, I've seen some people say it's really good who probably are good at the game. I kind of just don't believe them, but we'll put it here. It can buy a bunch of time. It can block flying. It can, like, take the hits from the Vulture. Maybe not, it dies from 2 hits, but it can take hits, maybe give you some time to get other stuff out. But I would so much rather have so many other one drops that I don't believe in it. But maybe we'll put faith in people and get it up to niche fit. I've not really used it. It's a rare, so I don't play much with rares because I play Skullstorm. Moose Buck is specifically, like, you're happy to have it in the goat deck. You would never really pick it anywhere else. I'm going to put it in build around fit. It makes sense in exactly one deck. Mud Turtle is kind of the not worst card I end up taking the most, just because it's a 2-drop, and I always think I'm going to move its shield over to, like, a Direwolf or something or a Direwolf pup, something that needs to survive a hit, and it would just help to survive a hit and make it a little cleaner on Grizzlies. But I rarely actually move it over, and it's always a bummer when I draw it. Possum's good. Like, Possum's in the it's fine category. I guess it's got to be worse than Amoeba. A little better than Mealworm, probably. Yeah, it's fine. It's a card. It's not ruining your deck. Porcupine suffers from being a 1-drop. Kind of pleasant ability. To me, this looks like it should be a decent card. 1/2 is very standard stats for a 1-drop. It has an ability that actually takes out enemy Mantis Gods, which is really cool. Takes out enemy Mantises. If with Death Touch combined, it can do some fun things because anything that hits it just dies. But it's just very low impact. Ouroboros is a rare and is incredible. It's incredible on 2 fronts. So obviously I haven't played much with it because it's, basically not there in Skullstorm unless you get a golden pelt. Unlike the Mantis God, you can't start with it. But at the worst, you could just use it like a cockroach and move its ability to something else, and it has one of the best abilities. But at its best, maybe you move it to Mantis God. But at its second best, every time it dies, it permanently gets +1/+1 for the rest of the run. And so, like, you just find ways to kill it a few times, and eventually you have an 8/8, and the 8/8 is just an 8/8 that when it dies returns to your hand stronger. It's fantastic. No matter how you use it, it's something. Pronghorn. I think Pronghorn's kind of interesting. I think most decks don't really want it. I'm going to put it in the niche fit. Just the fact that it can hit the lane next to it means there are some Grizzly fights where it's going to win you the fight, and most other cards wouldn't, because you need 1 extra damage to a lane, and you can get that 1 extra damage with the Pronghorn. It has fun interactions with Death Touch, but I think it's mostly not a very good card, right? These are all cards where, like, if you have specific other things, there's a reason you'd want to pick this up, and it would be a lot better than most things, but most decks I don't think want these cards. But in the decks that do, these cards are better than most of the cards in the It's Fine category, right? So, it's important to be able to evaluate. Rat King, I think, is just bad. Its ability is not the worst thing. Rattler, I really dislike. Raven Egg really suffers from being a 1-drop. Like, I think it's a little better than Elk Fawn because I think Raven is better than Elk. Now, it's a little worse turn 1, but it also doesn't have annoying movement, but it just suffers. Raven is probably at the best end of this. It could be in the it's fine category. I've never really gotten that much value out of its flying. Red Heart, let's give it build around fit. Like, very specific combos it goes off, but almost always those combos would win you the game anyway. Like, you didn't actually, it's like a fun way to finish it, but you didn't need it. Pelt Lice, I think has double strike, and double strike is good for moving to other things. Also, it seems natural to put in build around fit. If you have pelts, it gets to come out automatically. Like, it's clearly terrible, but I'm pretty sure it has double strike, and just being able to move double strike to something else is real value. So let's put in build around fit. I'm not sure on that. Again, I don't know the rares very well. Raccoon costs 1 blood. This is an out of date stat. It's a 1-drop that isn't high impact and can't really develop high impact. So it goes somewhere in here. Let's put it next to the Stoat. Kingfisher I hate, but I did win my Waterborne deck with an amazing Kingfisher, so I'm going to put it at the top of the worst category. River Snapper has the benefit of not being a 1-drop, but other than that, it's terrible. Sparrow's horrible. I would never want Sparrow. I think flying on a 1-2 is just bad, because the one thing 1-2s can do nicely is like pick off enemy elk fawns before they evolve, that kind of thing, and you really want to be able to hit the board to do that. People are kind of high on Skunk. I think you just want to get rid of Skunk. It doesn't actually wall that much. The only Skunk you get naturally comes with Annoying. I don't know why you'd ever take a Skunk otherwise. Gets in the way of Fair Hand Mechanic, all that other stuff. We're on the final stuff. Wolverine. I always want its ability to go off. Never does. It's a card. It doesn't get in the way of anything, at least, but it's a card. You can have it in your deck. It's not the worst. Turkey Vulture's terrible. It is the worst. I hate that card. It's so hard to afford. Even if you've sacked a Black Goat, you can afford this, but if you have any other bone cards, it's not easy, and basically any combo that's creating enough bones you can play it easily, you probably have other targets that are just as good. Wolf Cub. I like Wolf Cub. It's it kind of gets in the way of better 1-drops, right? Maybe I'll put it where Cat is, right next to Cat. Of kind of like, I'd rather have Cuckoo, I'd rather have Beehive, I'd rather be building around Mantis, Black Goat, Warren, Mantis God. There are a whole bunch of 1-drops. A lot of the times, at least one of those is accessible that I'd rather have. But if I don't have those, it's a 1-1 that becomes a 3-2. It doesn't have weird movement like the Elk Fawn. 3-2 is real value. You put some stats on it or some abilities. It can be a one cost build around that works. Skink, I love. Skink is better than that. I'm going to put the Skink ahead of the Black Goat. I really want to put the Skink in the centerpiece tier, but it's not quite that good. But it combines with all that stuff so well. Like, you combine the Skink with the Warren, and, like, the Skink lands, and it creates a bunny. But that bunny also has the dodge away ability, which leaves the thing, which creates another bunny. Or you put the Skink with the Magpie, and you tutor a card, and then when it dodges, you tutor another card. And unlike the Beehive, it has a point of attack, and if you can up its attack, not only can you start doing some damage so that it can stabilize your position if the early board is tough and it's your only 1-drop, but also it can block more than one lane, and upping its stats helps what it leaves behind, so that's incredible. Undying Skinks are fantastic. Item generating Skinks are fantastic. The Skink is a card that wants to see campfires, wants to have abilities moved. It's just a really good central piece to so much. If there was a deck starting with the Skink, it would probably be my favorite deck to play. I would really enjoy a deck where a Skink was one of the starting 3 cards. Okay, what do we have left to do? Alright, the Wild Bull's pretty trash. That's just like another bad 2-drop. I'm slightly underrating the Raccoon here, but it doesn't really make a difference. It's not a good card. Okay, Urayuli. So, 4 mana, 7/7. What do you do with that? Well, the Black Goat can't get it out. So I think it's either a niche fit or a build around fit, but it's probably a build around fit. If you have Corpse Maggots, you have a way to get it out, right? Otherwise, really hard to afford. Like the cat, you still need 3 other sacrifices. You can't have like a fur or a boulder on the board, or you just can't have enough sacrifices. If you do get it out, 7/7 is obviously incredible stats, but it basically has to be cheated out, and it's hard to do, and it's a rare, so Skullstorm is not really relevant. Gek. 1/1 for 0. Where do you put 1/1 for 0? I put it here. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe I'll put it here. There are people who put Gek top, and I think that's defensible. Being 0 cost, if you can combine it with Undying, is amazing. If you can combine it with like item generation or a bunny, right? Then it's a 0 cost thing that creates 2 mana, right? Unlike the Warren, which costs a mana to create a second mana. You up its stats and you just have this incredible force for 0 mana. It's very good. But I think like you get the cockroach and there are a ton of things that become busted. Or a whole bunch. You get the Gek, I'm not sure. I think you need a little more help to be busted. Right? I think you're a little further away from being busted, but it's very good on its own. 0 mana 1/1 is, or 0 cost 1/1 is just great. It's got to be somewhere up here. You could put it higher. You could not really put it lower. Okay, 4 cards to go. Tadpole, another 0 coster, but one I'm a little more ambivalent about. Let's think. Put it here for now. Right? Unlike the Gek, it doesn't immediately do damage. Unlike the Gek, it cannot chump block. Right? If you have an Undying Gek or something like that, you can keep placing it in squares to block. The Tadpole doesn't block. If it spends a turn on the board, then it doesn't recur as a 0 cost card. So if you have Undying or something like that, you don't actually keep the Undying if you ever let it stay on the board. So it's a little clunkier to use, and like, yeah, and it can't jump that first turn. It does have block flying, which is something. I've never built around it as the centerpiece because in the null deck the Gek is so much better, and in other decks you usually have something better to build around. I'm not sure where this goes. I'm tempted both ways. I'll leave it here for now because I think just having a 0 cost thing is innately a really useful effect. But I'm a little skeptical of this one, and I think it should be behind a lot of other kind of 0 and 1 drops. Ijirak is odd. You can't get it in your deck. Because the way to get it in your deck is it can be hidden behind a boss given rare, but we do not get boss rares. That said, a 4/1 that can't be attacked can still die to things like porcupine effects, but a 4/1 that can't be attacked is obviously pretty great. Depends what it's hiding behind for what cost it's worth, but it's obviously a very good card. I'm just going to put it here. No, I'm not. I'm going to put it at the top of its fine because I called it important card to useful strategies, and you can't really strategize around it. You also don't know when you've drawn it until you play it and it shows up. So okay, we'll put it there. Strange Larva. Again, a card not really relevant to Skullstorm, so it doesn't really matter where I put it, but it's a 0/3 that becomes a 0/3 that becomes a 7/3. Though if it's taken damage, that damage stays, right? So it needs to survive 2 turns. And this means it's not going to be a great 1-drop to build around because you don't get immediate pressure. You don't get immediate pressure. I think it's okay, but it's just there's so many other things you'd rather in your 1-cost slot. It can beat some things that like the Wolf Cover the Cat could never beat, right? 7 fly, and it's flying. 7 flying power is pretty huge, but it has to stay alive, and you're often under a lot of pressure. But again, you never get it in Skullstorm, so it's really hard to test there. But I'm skeptical it scales well to Skullstorm. You could get it if you got a gold pelt. I just never have gotten it. Field Mice. Very interesting card. This will be our final card to rate. And so in the main game, it's better than Undying. In the main game, if you have an Undying Mantis God, you play it. When it dies, it comes back to your hand and you can play it again. If you play it with Field Mice, it makes a new Mantis God in your hand, so you could play more than one Mantis God at a time, and each one will create a new one, so it goes on forever, but you can play a lot at once. In this, it only creates the second card once. That's a great effect. It means with the Warren, you can create a total of 4 bunnies off one Warren creating a second Warren, because they each create a bunny, and each of those bunnies creates another bunny. It doesn't keep going, but that's a lot of value. Um, you put it on something like the skink, and it creates a ton of things. You put it on the black goat, you can sacrifice black goat twice. You can get out 2/3 drops. That's great. You put it on the beehive, as long as they're attacking you on the ground, that's great. You can't really combine it well with the magpie because it'll always cost 2, and you want these effects to be on something cheaper. You can't really combine it with the pack rat because, again, you want these effects to be on something cheaper. But there's a whole bunch of stuff. You put it on the Mantis God, not as good as Undying, but you can get 2 Mantis Gods out at once. You have any really big low-cost attacker, like you've upped your Mantis, this is an amazing thing to put on it because you can just land 2 Mantises. I think the Field Mice is great. So final list. I think Undying is the best ability, and Mantis God's the best attacker. Then we have things that just can very quickly get broken out of hand. Pack Rat maybe shouldn't be here, but items should get credit for being here. Then we have kind of the very high-end 1-drops, the best kind of other abilities to put on them in Field Mice, the best attackers against the Grizzly Bears in Direwolf and Direwolf Pup, the way to be able to run high-cost cards. Maybe there should be a gap around Corpse Maggot's Cuckoo to a new tier. But you get another good attacker against the Bears, and some more high-end, but 0 and 1 drops I'm a little more skeptical about. Then we get slightly worse or harder to use attackers, along with nice little boosts, but ones that aren't super changing the game. These are cards that are going to be in good decks, but they're not why the deck is good. Yeah, then we get niche fits, cards that I think have specific uses, but definitely aren't wanted by every deck, and definitely aren't wanted in every situation. It's kind of weird to have Ringworm here, because that card is, like, objectively the worst card, but just because it can be sacked to the campfires, I think it clearly has value if you want to hit up the campfires. Then we have the stuff where your deck has to be a lot more committed to playing them, but if it is, they can pay off. 6/14 Moose Bucks are great in the Goat deck, that kind of thing. Then we have cards that I think are okay. Like, I'm not miserable about having them in my deck, but I think it's not just that they're not the reason the deck is good. Like, enough of these and the deck really needs high star power to make it through. These are either low impact or overcosted cards, or cards that can't do key rolls, like the Great White can't block, which is just really hurtful. And then we have the cards that actively get in the way of what you're trying to do, or you just can't play. I never end up being able to afford the Rattler. In any deck I make that many bones, I have better targets. Maybe I'll put that here too. But cards that just get in the way of playing good 1-drops and are worse than the really bad ones, or worse than the mediocre 1-drops that are kind of fairly costed, but thus not very good because you want to build up really busted 1-drops. Or cards that cost so many bones that whenever you draw it, you're just like, oh, this is a card that just sits in my hand for the rest of the game. Okay, Rattler probably should be up a tier, but Turkey Vulture shouldn't. I hate that card. And, yeah, that's my final tier list after having recorded beating Skullstorm with all 8 decks. This feels about right to me. I should say, the Kingfisher was the star of my final run on the Waterborne deck. Any card can be built to be busted, but they need tools from up here, right? The Kingfisher needed the Mantis, and needed a massive amount of campfire boosts and combinations and whatnot to be good at the Mycologist. So the cards up here need less work and are have much more value from investing in them. The cards down here need a ton of help and have less payoff for investing in them. But if you're going to do it, I guess you do it with a flyer, not a non-flyer in River Otter. Which I guess for my pick is the worst card in the game. And I also think it's just important to note, like, you can't create a straight tier list. You have to say, like, certain cards are useful to certain decks, right? Some decks, the Wolf is a really nice pickup, and you'd rather get the Wolf than get, like, a Warren. Say you start with the Egg deck. You just can't take the Warren at the start unless you also take, like, a Direwolf, because you're just going to lose. You don't have damage. And taking something like a Wolf is more valuable. It's kind of rare that you have to pick cards from the I am not happy about this tier over good cards, but any card from the it's fine or even maybe niche fit or build around fit, build around fit, yeah, sometimes you just want ants, can be the pick over much higher ranked stuff, and it really does depend on the decks. But that's why I tried to put this not as like S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, D tier, etc., but instead like these are cards that can go off with a ton of things. These are cards that can go off with most things. These are cards that are often very good combinations for the above, and usually have some good combinations with some stuff below too. Here we get into stuff that just doesn't combine that well. You'll notice a lot of the cards here don't really have abilities. This is actually where the fewest abilities are, but the stats are good enough that they can work in various decks. Now we start to get into bad abilities, but abilities that might have a specific purpose that's really valuable. And then we get into abilities that just don't impact enough. And so it's not the end of the world, but it can be in your deck. And finally we end with all the cards I hate and I think are active detriments to almost any deck, and the goal is to get rid of them.